Hey everyone, Margarita here. I want to talk in this video today more in depth about my mother's behind the scenes crimes and all of the false police reports and delusional phone call placing she's done to all the large agencies and individuals along the way. So, I guess most people probably don't know this, and I've figured this out quite some time ago, well over 10 years ago for sure. Probably closer to 15 years ago, I figured this out as an adult, that this was going on I was an adult. And I knew this from the time I was a child in elementary school. And it traveled on throughout school. And once I cut ties at 18 in 2002 and bought my first home and went my own way and cut my mother off, I had no clue that she was doing this with large agencies in the background for a few years from there. I had just assumed that everything would be normal once I cut ties and was not expecting her to place these delusional phone calls to large agencies to come after me. I'm not sure why I thought things would change when she had done that my entire life. And it took some years once I was an adult. I was definitely uh, probably 26, 27, maybe, when I figured out that she was doing this as an adult the entire time. It took numerous sets of things to happen to me as an adult to figure out that that's what she was doing. Um, I guess I did know a little bit early on when I first moved out on my own. So, like 2002 to 2005 or six, I did know a little bit, but just didn't understand to the degree of how serious all this was. So there was a period of time where none of this was on my mind. I went on living my life and I kept having all these problems along the way. So that's eventually, it's what told on herself in the long run, because it's just not normal for someone to have all the problems I've had in life, all these things that were going on, all this harassment from all these different people and agencies, and saying the strangest things to me and assuming the strangest things that aren't real. But it was going on all along from the time I was a small child. It had never stopped. It just shifted from it being my teachers into it being large agencies and other individuals. So I guess you could say I was very heavily aware of this by yeah, it was probably in my late 20s. I realized it had actually never stopped. And even then, I still didn't know to what degree until the 2013 escapade. Then it became known how serious the problem really was. So since then, from then to this day, it's still going on. That's why all the problems that I currently have are tied back to my mother's ongoing crimes. Literally everything going on in my life, which are all problems at this point. Um, and I'm digging my way up out of all these problems while sick and injured, which at the root ties me being sick and injured ties back to her ongoing crimes as well. So everything, literally everything I'm dealing with. And it's still going to take me some time to dig up out of where I'm currently at. And I've been digging in the same spot for about a year and a half now. So hopefully I'm able to make things move a little further within the next month. I'll do an update when I get there. But going back to all of these, this hidden agenda she had, this behind the scenes agenda with calling all these people and agencies. And I did try to tell some people as a young child and as a teenager when there would be this or that going on. I did try to tell the people she would be calling in advance, or I tried to tell them that what she was saying wasn't real, or I tried to notify a couple people in advance and they didn't believe me. And then one of them had to come apologize to me because 5 minutes later, my mother did exactly that. I believe at the time I was 16. So, going back to when this all started, this started, like I said, just between family members, friends, neighbors, coworkers, different people she knew. Just when I was a small child, before I even started kindergarten, she was doing this, I believe. just because I had confronted her about poisoning batches of food. And then a couple years after that is when I was left the trust. And the stipulations behind it were if I was deemed mentally incompetent, deceased, or incarcerated, then she would be able to have access to this trust. She right then and there got this bright idea and had no intention of ever giving me the trust or notifying me of it. She had every intention of making sure that she was the one that was going to keep it. So she began growing that false narrative from that point forward and continued to do so all along where we are today. It's never stopped from that day. So around that time, I was in kindergarten, and I went to a Catholic school for kindergarten and first grade. So the teachers were a lot different than in public school. And they're really mean. Most of them are really mean, or they were back then. I don't know about now. But it was like hard enough getting through school with how it was, and then it turned uh, it turned a lot different once I got in second grade. I got put in public school once my parents bought a house in Brownstown, and I went to Woodhaven schools. So from that point forward, things changed, but the phone calls never stopped. Here she was calling behind the scenes, telling all these people I'm this problem child, I'm known to lie, I'm known to steal, all these different things she would call and say. And I believe every year at the beginning of the school year is where it would start, and she would call them and tell them these things up front. And if the teacher happened to be a narcissist, because now I'm looking back over the course of time and I see the bigger picture now, but if the teacher was a narcissist, then the narcissist jumped on board with my mother, the other narcissist, because birds of a feather flock together. So anyone that was a narcissist played her game, played along with her, and my mother would create the problems I would have or create physical, mental, or emotional distress at home. So I wasn't completing my homework properly, or she would create disasters and problems to where I like mentally and emotionally could not do my work because of what she was doing at home. And some of this time, my dad was not there. She always arrived before my dad. There was many times where she arrived before him, or I went to Latchkey for a short period of time, but I did start riding the bus home by myself. By age 10, I stopped going to Latchkey and said I didn't want to go back there anymore. So this went on all through elementary school in that manner. And there was a few teachers right off the rip from the beginning of the school year phone call. There was some along the way who just weren't narcissists. And they also just shrugged her off and didn't participate one way or the other. They just acted as if they never received the phone call, and there was no negative actions taken toward me at all during the entire school year. There was years where that did happen. Now there was more years where it did happen, and once I got to middle school and high school, there was more teachers, so there was more people on board with doing this. And none of these people ever realized that what she was saying about me was never real. She would even call and tell them that they needed to move my desk closer to their desk so they could keep an eye on me, because I'm just this hot mess, this terrible child, this problem child. And what it was to create more mental and emotional distress with people always having their eyes on me. So that went on all along, and it wasn't until fifth grade where it got extremely bad. So I'll talk about in that in its own episode. But 2 out of the 3 of those teachers participated heavily, and I did not think I was going to make it out of the fifth grade. And there are 2 people who can verify this, at least 2. There could be more, but I know for sure there's at least 2 people who can verify this today. So after that, I got into 6th grade, and it was the exact opposite. That set of teachers were all men. The other set were women. The teachers the next year chose not to participate whatsoever. They acted normal as if that had never happened, and it was like a miracle had happened. So I had extreme relief. I went from extreme mental and emotional distress to extreme relief. And then I went to middle school. So it changed once I got to middle school and high school. I had all these different teachers. So it was like random which ones would participate, because then they also have a lot more students to deal with. So these people are maybe a little less willing to participate, but then if something happens where it catches their attention, then they were more willing to participate. That went on all the way until I was done with high school. And she did manage to get a couple handfuls of these teachers throughout middle school and high school on board with this harassment. And some of them just didn't participate, but yeah, there was a couple handfuls. And what they would do is they would take me in the hallway and they would scream at me and tell me that some of them even told on her for what she was doing. They really thought what she said was true. So when they were yelling at me, they were saying how they knew about this or that because that's what my mother told them. And so I'm getting the information along the way as this is all going on that that's what she was doing. However, none of it was real. So even when I tried to explain it, or maybe I didn't know some of the times that that was really the situation, that she had actually called, uh, there was nothing I could do about it. The teacher didn't want to believe me or wasn't listening to my side of the story, just believing the strange lunatic who places these delusional phone calls. So it made my life 10 times harder than it ever needed to be. At no time was that ever necessary. And then I would go home and be in mental and emotional distress at home. And depending on if I was there alone, I was fine. But then my mother would come home before my dad sometimes, and then there would be a problem. She would always come home mad, and I wasn't allowed to have one thing out of place in the entire house. Like if I made one wrong step or I touched one object, she would flip out when I got home. So I mostly would stay in the one room with the TV, and I would sit just on the carpet and not touch anything because of her behavior. And that's how I just didn't touch anything throughout the whole house. I just sat in the middle of the room. The majority of the times I was home alone. Because then I had to deal with her when she got home, and it was rare that she ever came home in a good mood. Now, if she was dealing with people that didn't like her, or she was creating problems at work and having all these issues, because she creates the problems and people are, I don't really know the circumstances, but I know there was some circumstances like this when she was working around that time as well. Then she would be more mad and come home and take it out on me. Now, there was sometimes my dad got home first, or they would both be there together. If they were there together, she would not act that way towards me the way she would if he wasn't home. And so it was like his presence controlled her behavior, and without him ever even knowing any of this. So it did not dawn on me until 2019 that that's actually what happened all along the way. I never really thought about it to that degree. And so, going forward, I'll talk about the two high school incidences. They happened about a year apart, where she placed a delusional phone call to the school. I don't know if it was the principal or it was the school cop directly or who she asked to talk to when she called. But she called and stated that a friend of mine and me were conversing that morning in my bedroom, and she heard us talking about blowing up the school. This was a year after the Columbine shooting, and this is when they began implementing the lockdowns. Matter of fact, the first lockdown drill ever was that day. And so we were questioned. So I'll talk more about this, but we were questioned. It was found out that we were just very confused. So I'll go into the details in the separate video, but nothing came of it because they could tell something wasn't right with the report they had received based on our behavior separately. We weren't even talking to each other by the time we were each called down individually. There was, they let the whole thing go. And later on that day, it was my dad who realized that my mother had did it and even admitted it to me on the phone. And the teacher whose class I was in when I got pulled from class was one of the ones who chose not to participate in this harassment and this bullying against me. So when she asked me what happened and I told her, she was really upset. She was like crying and hugging me. And it's because she realized what my mother had been doing because of all those delusional phone calls. I had her for a couple different school years for numerous classes, numerous different classes. So she recognized what was going on. But nothing ended up coming of that situation. The following year, her little plan did work. So I'll go more into detail because there's other aspects of it, how it worked and how it got to that point. But the following year, it did work. It wasn't the same report. It was something totally different, a totally different situation. She just waits for things to happen, and then she blows those situations apart and creates more problems within a situation that shouldn't be going on. So that's what happened the following year, and it did work. And I did get, I don't know if I was like suspended the rest of the year or what exactly the term was. But I was already at my job at Steak and Shake for about a year, and all I did was start working full time. And I also worked for Wendy's at the same time as well. And I just started working more hours, and I was making well over $1,000 a week at age 17 once I got kicked out of school. So, and this was in the early 2000s, this was like 2001. So all she did was turn my thinking pattern into how life would be easier for me because her harassment went on so long term with the way she was doing this. And I was in so much mental and emotional distress along the way, unable to get through life because of what she was doing, that once I was working and I was off with people that she didn't know and didn't have access to, and then here I was making all this money at such a young age. I ended up not going back to school the following year and signing up to finish school through the mail because I saw how much money I could make. And I knew that was a lot for someone my age. And I saw that that was my opportunity to get into my own home, especially because I had longevity at the two places I was at that time. So I continued to work in that manner, 40, 50 hours a week, and just kept doing it because I had two jobs. So I worked 40 at one job, 10, 20 hours at another job. And that way I didn't ever have to see her either. So I stayed gone. And that's where things shifted and changed and where my mindset changed. And I'm like, well, these are good companies. Like I can make, look how much money I'm making. And I knew it was more than what she was making. I didn't know exactly how much more, but I knew it was more than what she was making. So that's where the shift changed, where my mindset changed, and I saw things differently. And I was in so much distress, I had to get out of the situation. And it looked like that was my only way out of the situation, which it was. There was no other way out of the situation. So I was already making plans to buy my first home shortly after that, about a year later, from that point forward. And that's when the delusional phone call placing then shifted onto her using CPS, because when I moved into my home, I also had my first kid. So now it turned into CPS, and it happened, I think, 3 or 4 separate times, me living in that home from 2002 to 2007. It happened at least 3 or 4 times, all separate situations, them all contacting her each step of the way. And she managed to get one of those to go to court, which it was then dismissed because the judge saw I own my home. I have longevity at my jobs. Like I make really good money. It doesn't add up, the things they were saying. But along the way, so since I had cut ties right when I got into that home, all along the way, even as a child, here she was calling all these different family members, telling them I'm this troubled teenager. I do all these things. I'm so bad. I did this. I did that. Oh, did you hear what she did? Did you hear what she did? All along the way. So when I cut ties and got into my first home, that continued on. She never told anybody I cut her off. There's no relationship. There's no contact. She's out of my life. And that she's actually calling these agencies behind the scenes, creating what problems I was having once I was off on my own. So she continued on with the family members and the friends and all those delusional phone calls. She would do it when she was alone. She wouldn't do it when my dad was around. My dad wasn't even aware she was doing this. And once she created so much chaos with using the CPS system, that's when I was forced to buy the other home. Before I was ready to get into the next home, it wouldn't have been much longer, another year or two, and I would have been into my next home anyway, building with the real estate how I had planned all along. And I abruptly had to leave and get into my next home in 2007 due to what she had done. So it turned into her still repeating delusions to all these people, her repeating them to my dad while they're alone, and I'm nowhere near them. There were periods of times where my dad did take my 2 oldest kids home and they would babysit them at their house. It was my dad doing all the work, but I always worked at night. So it would only be a couple hours. They'd be going to bed. And then I'd pick them up late at night. She never woke up when I was doing this, but I would come pick them up at night. So we still had no contact the nights that this would happen. And sometimes my dad would wake up and then I would just grab them and go. And I made it work with my schedule and their sleep schedule, and I made it work so I could sleep and their sleep would just be broken. And we went about it that way for some time. There was periods of time where I had other babysitters along the way, so they weren't just at my parents' house. They were not being raised there. That was not their home. They didn't have custody of them. They literally were with me the whole time. So her telling people that is extremely far from the truth, especially with all the different babysitters I had along the way. And I mean, we can even verify that because a lot of those people who babysat for me back then, I still have contact with today. So these people can all verify this. And so the delusional phone call placing, it continued on once I got into that next home and the economy started to crash. She just started, mostly it was family and friends and such at that point for a little bit. It was maybe a couple of years, 2-3 years. It was mostly family and friends. But what she didn't tell anybody is all the problems I was having are because she's got these agencies chasing me from different homes, and it's creating all these problems along the way that I'm having. Because then the economy crashed and I shouldn't have been in that next home yet. I shouldn't have had that high interest rate that I had. It was an emergency because of what she caused. And then I made the decision to walk away from my house a couple years in and pay for my next one with cash. But what she didn't tell anybody is that I had keys to 3 different houses where we all had places to sleep at these other places. And she made it look like I lost my house to drugs and I'm homeless and me and my kids all live at their house when that was never the case. I made it a smart decision to go ahead and own my next house outright with cash because I saw what she was doing. And then I could easily get into the next one very quickly if it were to happen again. And it would still continue on with my long-term real estate plans. So she kept telling people I was on drugs, I lost my house, all these things. None of that was real. Again, there were still other people who were watching my kids as well. They were not just at my parents' house. My address was never changed to their address. Along that time frame, there was some other CPS calls as well. And then here they were trying to reach her. She's feeding them more false information, telling them that she raised my kids, had custody. And then I do believe at one point when I worked for Applebee's for a few years, back in like 2009 to 2012, I worked for Applebee's. I do believe she was calling the manager frequently around that time because she was jealous, and so was the manager separately, jealous that I was about to cash out on a condo in Florida. And she was calling her and telling her things. I don't know exactly what she was saying. Stuff to make her turn against me, really. And other situations. So it wasn't just that. There was a problem with the Taylor Police Department in that time frame as well. They've been completely removed from the situation for well over a decade at this point. I'm not even sure any of those people are still working for that department where we are today in 2025. But all these different problems came along the way with the long-term problems she was creating. It created more problems, and then she would insert herself in each set of problems and then call to the top of whoever's in charge at whatever agency or whatever's going on. She managed to carry that out. So I do have the CPS reports from that time frame. I have about, I think it's like 18 or 19 years worth. So I'll do a whole separate episode where I read through those reports and kind of like break down what she was doing during each one of these situations where they were called. So that was going on at that time as well. And then right around the time I had enough money to buy my next home, here I was looking at homes every day regularly. It was part of my daily routine is looking at the next home, getting ready to make another big move. I had opened 2 other businesses. I'd been 100% self-employed at this point, and I had stopped working for Applebee's as well. That's when she created another huge escapade when I was talking to a guy. So in her sick head, I'm not allowed to date anybody and I'm not allowed to have any kids. So I'll get more into that because then I had my youngest when I was 32. and there was a problem there as well. So I'll get into that in its own episode, but she has this underlying delusional thought that I'm not supposed to date people, I'm not supposed to have kids. So she waits for me to date somebody, or it's not, I wouldn't even call it dating. We were just talking, and she started creating problems. And what she was doing, because she saw my business, one of my businesses took off really fast, it was doing really well, on top of me still being self-employed as well. She couldn't have that happening, couldn't have me being successful, couldn't have me cashing out on a house, which I was still looking at that time. Doesn't matter. Everything is mine individually. Everything is mine separately. That's how it's always been. Doesn't matter who I'm talking to or if I choose to date somebody. So nobody I've ever dated they've never been introduced to my parents along the way, like, oh yeah, I'm dating so-and-so here, nice to meet you. No, that's never happened. Never happened a day in my life in that manner. Now, they have crossed paths my mother has crossed paths with maybe 3 or 4 people I've ever dated ever, and 2 of those are my kids' dads. And she did not meet my daughter and my youngest son's dad until my daughter was 9. So that says a lot right there. And there was reasons for that, because of her behavior and because of what she does. That was why she never met him all those years. Now, it's a different story with my dad, because we always maintained a separate relationship with my dad, and he was always at my houses along the way, where then, yes, he would be crossing paths with different guys I'd be talking to, because he's in and out of my houses. So kind of unavoidable, but it was still never introduced like, oh yeah, so this is my boyfriend. Like, no, that never even happened. That never once happened, and it never even went far enough for anyone to be called my boyfriend in the first place. And part of that is due to the chaos, the crimes, the conflict, the disasters that come out of that ever happening. There's numerous reasons why. Plus, I spent my entire life working, all prior to my injury. But that's where she would find an opportunity to insert herself and blow things apart. So if I were to date somebody and she found out about it, it would then blow my life apart. So long-term problem that's been going on all along the way since I was a teenager. And then, it turned into the Brownstown Police Department had been involved long-term, because that's where they lived. So me as a teenager, she had started some delusional phone call placing back then, got them to get involved with me back then. She later down the line did it again when she kidnapped my kids in 2013. And then once I got moved into my house in Flat Rock here 8 years ago, she then started calling my city's police department in Flat Rock, and then more in her city in Brownstown as well, because she was then sending my dad to come pick up my kids and bring them to her. And she was repeating delusions to everybody around her, my dad and my kids, and it was causing conflict and chaos. And they'd come back to my house, and it started problems. So it was going between the 2 cities, and long-term, so for, I guess you could say, the past 8 years or so, those cities have all been a problem, because I don't know if she called and talked to one specific person or a couple specific people. I don't think it's the entire department at both of those, but that's what she did all along the way. It was a long-term problem, still is, in those 2 cities. So if you view my videos on, they're already released on Flat Rock and Brownstown and all that. So once I became injured, she was a Beaumont Hospital employee. I've already released those videos as well. She inserted herself in person those times, a couple times, and made sure my son and I did not receive treatment in an extreme medical emergency. So you can scroll back several months and view those videos where I released that information. But she did that in person and was able to get other people to enter false information into my medical record. So long-term, by that happening, it caused long-term problems that are still ongoing in the current, even though she's been retired for 5 years. If I'm trying to seek treatment within a hospital system, they see the false information. And there's no way to fix how serious the situation is, because the damage is done. And there's been so many hospital visits, because I was in a fight for my life for some years and seeking treatment for some time before I actually found the private center, where there's all these repeated visits, and I'm trying to get oxygen, I'm trying to get help. And she's over here telling them that I'm making the whole thing up, and they're believing it because she's my mother. So long-term damage from those situations, still today, that's still a problem, because even when I died on the floor at Walmart 2 years ago and came back and was brought to the hospital, they still kicked me out because of the false information in my medical record, acted like that's not what happened. Still no treatment, no assessment, nothing. So you've got all these different agencies, and like I said, she had kidnapped my kids along the way numerous times. Each one of those situations, she involved many different courts, many different attorneys, and the friend of the court, but it's actually the court that I would go to with my kids' dads, is what it was. So two different court systems. And she would call to the top of those and get certain individuals involved in those. So I will talk about a couple of the specific cases out of Monroe and the people involved out of the Monroe friend of the court with my daughter. And then there was a situation in 2013 at the Wayne County front of the court as well, with my son's dad. And I'll talk more about those in their own episodes. But she also inserted herself in those situations, and gave them a bunch of false information and got them to operate against me. And what she did was criminal, and it ties in with some of the other crimes going on. So I'm not going to go into that in this video, but all of these courts and people are involved, and that's how she does it. She does it by placing, she caused the problem to happen in the first place. Then she calls and inserts herself, and then gives them a bunch of false information, and then it's chaos and destruction and da 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 da, and it just goes on and on and on and on for months, if not years. The fallout of each time, each one. And so that's there's issues. There's some serious issues that came out of those situations. And she then inserted herself in the 2021 Ford gas bill here in Flat Rock with the city, with the top of Ford. She did that as well. She called to the top of whoever was in charge, gave them a bunch of false information, told them that I have this mental disorder, my son and I aren't injured, and got them to cut our hotel off, where we nearly died due to this. And that was why I had to buy my house in Ohio. Otherwise, Ford would have continued to pay for my hotel, so we wouldn't have died. And they believed her. They believed all the bullshit. And because I was so close to death and it was such an extreme fight for my life, and I couldn't enter the area for some time, and they were demanding that I go get this paperwork that I couldn't physically go get. It wasn't possible to do because of how much gas had spilled and how sick we were. I couldn't even travel through the area to go get it where the offices were, because it was not contained in a small area the way they told everybody it was. It had spread 50 to 100 miles out and into all the waterways. It took over the entire area for 1 to 2 years. It took 2 years to fully clear where my house is, but the particles were pretty heavy in the surrounding areas for about a year as well. So she inserted herself in that. She caused all those problems in that. That's why I'm still dealing with the fallout of all of that today in 2025, because all the damage to my home happened due to that. Me having to put a tenant in it temporarily happened due to that. The tenant doing the damage, all that. The insurance checks getting thrown away, all of it. It all ties back to those delusional phone calls at the city and the top of Ford. So all along the way, this has been going on all along the way. I do believe there is other, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I do believe there's other places she has called along the way. If any situation happens, doesn't matter what it is, if she sees a way to blow my life apart using that situation, that's when she inserts herself, figures out who's in charge, and calls to the top. Starts telling them delusions about me. It's been ongoing my entire life, literally since I was in kindergarten, or longer, because she was telling family members, doing this on the phone with family members prior to me entering kindergarten. So all along the way, this has all been going on. Here she is, still in contact with all these family members that I don't have contact with. No one's still realizing that I had cut ties with her back in 2002. She still knows nothing about me. There's no relationship, no contact. Here she is creating all these problems. I'm living in extreme chaos, stumbling and fumbling, trying to pick up the pieces of each disaster as she's creating more disaster. And then she's calling all these family members in the background and telling them what a hot mess I am. But the entire time, it's been her in the background causing all of it from day one. It's literally never stopped. That's why I'm in the predicament I'm in, with all the damage to my home, with how sick I am as well, with me having to spend close to 200 grand out of pocket on treatments for us at a private facility, because initially we should have received initial treatment within the medical system, no matter what. Nobody has that extreme of a medical emergency where they've died and came back and they're near death for a very long time and then fighting for their life. Nobody does that. That doesn't happen to anybody ever. I don't believe that's ever happened in that type of situation where it's very long term and stays that way. But she's behind all of it, everything that's happened literally, and then calling all these family members, and they just believe her, just believing all along the way we've had contact in a relationship. When here, all these disasters that I'm dealing with that she's telling them I'm having, she created every single one of them. So that's what she does behind the scenes. Her actions are criminal. And then when she uses the police departments to do this as well in the court systems, that's criminal because she got attorneys to type up false uh, statements and a whole narrative about me that's not real. I will order at least one docket and get some of that information and do a video just on that. Same with the police departments. That's illegal. You cannot call and make false reports on somebody and then the police come operate on it repeatedly. And you're harassing me. You're harassing the victim when these people are taking her delusional phone calls and believing that stuff to be real. And on top of it, some of these phone calls, she's stating that I have a gun and I'm mentally unstable, and I have a copy of it in my possession. So that's how extreme it got. The one I have where it states that in Brownstown is from 2021. I'm sure she's done that in Flat Rock. I don't have the Flat Rock papers yet because it is almost $500 to get the entire stack of what's happened since I've lived here. That's saying they haven't redacted any of this information and hidden some of it or destroyed some of it. I'm not really sure. I'll have to be the judge of that once I do receive those documents. But the lengths she's gone and the things she's talked about and said that I've done and everything she's calling and telling people, none of it's real. None of that stuff has ever happened. None of that's real. That's what she's been doing every step of the way. It's just never stopped, and it's caused all these problems. And that's why when I initially had to leave here in the emergency and go buy my house in Ohio and stay down there, that's why I refused to give my address to anybody. And my older kids did not have my address because by then my daughter was manipulated fully by my mother. All these crimes were going on. She had been truant from school for over a year. All this went on due to the Ford, her creating the disasters and all the chaos and the delusional phone call placing during it. That's what created all that degree of chaos during that and why that happened in the first place. So when I went down there, I didn't give anybody, not even my older kids, my address. It was me and my youngest, and I literally refused to share my address for about a year. And I had to. My life was in danger. It was only a matter of time before I was going to have an issue down there if she knew where I was. I'm sure she tried to look the property records up. I'm sure she probably called maybe the Toledo Police Department. I'm not sure who she called, but where I lived, where my other house is, the Toledo Police don't actually service that spot because it's on the border of several other cities that are more like the suburbs. So they actually didn't service that area. So I'm sure if she was trying to call, that's probably who she called. And it didn't work because that's not who serviced where my house was. And then I also didn't move it into my name for about a year as well. So I did that intentionally. That way I couldn't be found because I was in so much chaos and so much disaster and so much danger. And I was so very sick at the same time this was going on. I was still very sick. And there's levels to it. Sometimes I'm a little more well, sometimes I'm not as well. It's not positive movement forward with my injury and the different particles that I take in and my brain tissue being open. It is up and down, up and down. It's not positive movement forward. It can't be, especially without treatment. And there's re-exposures and re-injuries that happen. So there's times where I'm up, times when I'm down. And when I got down there, I was very sick due to all the spills. And I had been living with my brain bleeding and in and out of consciousness with my ears itching extremely bad in a place where you can't reach. That was going on for about 9 months by the time I had gotten down there. And I was in so much distress that I just literally didn't share the address, didn't change the house into my name for some time, and stayed put and didn't talk to anybody. And it was the most peace I ever had in my entire life. So that's why I had to do that. That's at the root. That's the reason. There's numerous reasons, but that was the main reason. Eventually, I did share the address. It started to get shared for numerous reasons. And then by that time, my dad was already injured, and I was mostly up in Michigan dealing with my dad's injury and staying quite a bit at my friend's house up here in Michigan anyway, so I could get to him. So it didn't matter by the time I had shared the address. She did try to use CPS in Toledo to harass me once my dad fell and I tried to report her crimes what she was going to do, and the people I had told before she returned from California. And within that first, I believe it was the first week of his injury. And as soon as she got back, she then, heard from these people what I told them what she was going to do or the crimes she commits. And then she flipped the script on me and contacted Toledo CPS and tried to get a case going down there on more false information and fed them a bunch of bullshit trying to get them to harass me. However, the only thing they could find was my UPS store address. So they were trying to show up at the UPS store. I'm like, yeah, that's my address. Because my legal address is my house in Michigan. It was never going to change. That's my main address. That's my main home. I was temporarily gone. So she did pull that off for a short period of time with that agency. It didn't last long because when she started to dig for me, she even left me a message on my voicemail. She really thought I lived in Michigan. They couldn't do anything about it. They didn't know my full circumstances, and there was no way to find me at that point. They gave up. But once my dad became injured, she then started reporting right away into the first hospital. Of course, it was a Beaumont. So she has full control at all these Beaumont locations because that's who she worked for. She then told numerous different people all this false narrative about me. They wrote it in my dad's file. I actually have a copy of it, so maybe I'll come back and read that in its own video. It is in a longer video I already did, but it plays a significant role because everything on that paper is not real. And then as he transferred to different facilities, because he's been to at least 7 or 8 facilities at this point, I believe. And she tried to do that at each facility. And then long term, she did it at Specialty Spinal Care Facility. That's the long-term care facility. Even though I notified them in advance what she was going to do and made a police report in advance, she still managed to manipulate these people and control a false narrative and tell them all this stuff about me that isn't real. I do believe she pulled the gun situation there as well, telling them that I'm mentally unstable with the gun and have threatened her with it before. Something along those lines. I do believe that is the case with that facility, and that could be part of the reason that I'm banned. And it was numerous different hospitals that he was transferred to. She had me banned from a couple of them. Well, all of them now. It's all of them. She did that at Vibra in Taylor, Michigan. She did it at U of M in Ann Arbor. She did it at Specialty Spinal Care Facility in Romulus. She did it at the Beaumont in Royal Oak, Michigan. And I don't know if she did it at Beaumont Wayne or not. Beaumont Wayne was starting to believe me. So she could have, and that might have been what made them start to believe what I was saying, because he kept getting rushed back there so many times, and it was her causing it. That I do believe that that's part of the reason she caused him to go unconscious at that facility. It was a perfect opportunity. Once they had the 401k fight, once she planned on finishing him off, she did it there, and now she's suing them for what she caused. But I do believe it could be because they started to catch on to what I was saying with the repeated hospital visit pattern. That was the hospital he revisited the most, and they were going to be the ones to see the pattern the best. And those people that worked there, they got to know me because they were seeing me so frequently that, they even said, again, like, again, like, yeah, we're back. So I think people there noticed, and that that's, I think, maybe be the only one I'm not banned from, but he's no longer going to that facility because of what she caused there. So how ironic. So I think that might be the only one where she wasn't able to gain control over the false narrative about me and all these false statements. But there's many crimes that have happened. She's behind all of it. I will get back into the episode regarding her poisoning batches of food all along the way, the triggers, and some of the more extreme incidences and the times where it happened. And I'm 100% sure that's what happened. And some of these times I can't prove it, but I'm 100% sure. So I will get into that in its own episode. But that was what caused my dad's repeated rushes back to all these different facilities once all that started happening. And since I've been back to this house in Flat Rock, so right around the time I came back here first and then was permanently banned from my dad a few months later, but then I'm sitting here with over 100 grand in damage, more chaos, just trying to pick up all the pieces. At the same time, shortly before that, she had then called the City of Flat Rock's police department again, telling them all this false information again, getting them to make sure I can't make a police report, acting like I'm the problem and the girl didn't do anything wrong and I'm making the whole thing up. I don't know what was said exactly, but he refused to take my reports, so that says everything. But yeah, since I've been back here the past year and a half or so, once she was removed and I removed all the materials of the home, I haven't heard or seen any agencies at my house. Well, pretty sure, because I've been here the majority of the time. But so far, there hasn't been anything since I've been back. And I have been filming for about a year, so I don't know at what point she caught wind I was filming and releasing these videos and what she's all been doing all along the way. But I do believe since I've been releasing some of these videos, it has put a stop to some of these delusional phone calls and getting the agencies to show up at my house and harass me and cause more problems. Since that's all happened, I don't know if it's going to continue. I'm hoping the videos stop all of that. But she's responsible for all of it every step of the way, from the time I was a small child all the way till today, all the way into all this extreme chaos while all these facilities were banning me from my dad left and right within a couple month period. All of it. She's responsible for all of it, every single problem, literally. And it's just exhausting having to live life that way and constantly accommodate this into your life and then figure out how you're going to continue to produce income while all this chaos is continuously going on and this destruction is continuously going on. And then it all has to be juggled. And I'm permanently injured, chronically sick, still having to juggle all my symptoms with all the ups and downs. It makes it really hard. It's really frustrating. It's really exhausting. And I don't know what's going to happen in the end with this house, but it depends on how long it takes me to get it fully together. And then what happens with the videos and if arrests are made and when. I mean, not really if, it's more like when, because I don't intend on letting this go on forever. My main goal right now is to have arrests be made so I can begin my life. Because at no point have I ever gotten to begin my life due to all this delusional phone call placing, this false narrative, and all these people harassing me on all this bullshit that's never been real. So I guess all these different factors are going to determine how I move forward with this house. And it is supposed to be an Airbnb. It was supposed to be one 3 years ago. So we'll see if that actually gets carried out. Plans could change, and there's numerous factors that I don't have control over, and it could go a couple different ways. So I can't even give, a result of what I'm going to do until each situation plays out. So it's really out of my hands, but it's due to all the crimes and the chaos. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that because I'm sure people aren't aware she places delusional phone calls behind the scenes. It's been going on all along. And people watching the video, and if you know her and you've ever talked to her on the phone, you'll know because you've talked to her on the phone where she's telling you all these delusional stories about me that were never real in the first place. Here and there, she might get in a half truth here or there. But that's what she's done every step of the way. And I do believe these videos have definitely at least slowed down what's been going on. But who knows? We'll see how many more videos I have to crank out for action to be taken and arrests to be made and for this to fully stop, because it's just too much to deal with the condition I'm living with and everything else I'm forced to juggle, and I'm forced to accommodate this. I'm just hoping this all ends fairly quickly, very soon, because it's been going on for 40 years. It's kind of sick, But I will be back with more, with all those individual episodes that I was talking about, that I'll go further into depth on everything I said. They are on my list. I have a large list of different episode titles, and everything just has to be broken down so others can understand what I'm saying. Because if I were to just start talking in different part numbers to videos, it wouldn't make any sense. So that's why I have it labeled the way I do on YouTube. And you don't have to technically watch them in order. You can watch the intro videos and then click about the different episodes, and it's still going to make sense. Maybe you don't want to watch all of them, you want to watch some of them. It works better that way. With TikTok, I have just released full episode videos, and I will go back and do 10-15 minute part videos where I do talk and just tell the whole story. But by then I'll have all the individual videos up as well. So That's how it's going to be released on that platform. And then with YouTube, it's just structured better for people to be able to view it and understand the situation a little better with the way the playlists are labeled. So yeah, stay tuned for more. I'll be back with those other episodes soon. Thanks. Bye.